All right. Okay. Uh, I started writing seriously when I was about 14 years old, and I'm now about 74 years old. And that makes up about 6 decades. So I'd like to structure my reading tonight based on that sequence. So I'm going to read three poems from each decade, and at the end I'll read three very recently written poems, and I hope that will be interesting. So I'm starting in the 1960s. My first poem is Matabele Dry. The water table drops, boreholes cave in, crops tighten. Our cactus sighs like a puncture and dies. The water table drops, summer stretches and pops blisters on my shoulders. Dry heat cracks boulders when the water table drops too far. Nest building stops. Baobabs shrivel and squat like dotage on a chamber pot. The next one's called Geography Lesson. I was in my teens when I wrote these poems.
Sorry, John, just to disturb you for a bit. Can you please adjust your screen again?
In what way?
So are you using a laptop?
Yes.
Okay, bring your screen closer a bit. Closer to you. Slightly more. It will bring the camera down so that we can see you. So just adjust the...
John, just bend the screen towards you like I'm doing now. See, there I go back and there I go forwards, if you can see me.
Yes, I can.
Oh, that's brilliant.
All right now?
Yeah, now it's good. Thank you.
Okay. Now my next one's called Geography Lesson. Yesterday I dreamed the hours in teeming fields of summer flowers, inhaling skies of drowsy air while insects scuttled everywhere. There was such life beneath the grass that I, for one, would sooner pass an afternoon in wonder there than dull at desk with bum on chair. Today at desk with bum on chair, I turn a page and pull my hair and turn a page and force my brain to focus on the coastal plain. Then all too soon attention yields and I am sprawling in the fields. And then my last one for the 60s is called Those Dark Acacias. And I feel the music throbbing through the dark acacia trees, hectic palpitations pitching pods in a game with the breeze, and the drone of beetles darting round like model aeroplanes. I am sitting on the granite wall above the laughing drains that gurgle round and down among our village public ways, and you are with the music and the others and their praise. And when you take the high road home with moonlight in your eye, someone's jacket round your shoulders, someone's fingers on your thigh, when you pass those dark acacias, you may hear the branches sigh. They are sighing after music that has had a dying fall, in the laughter of hyenas, in the nightjar's creaking call, in a Sunday evening sickness stretched along the granite wall. Okay, so now we move into the 70s. And I've selected three poems from that decade. My first one is Remember Granny Trot's Mulberry Jam. That was in the days of the old strip road, before the merger, before the quarry started looking like my dad, long before the fighting. I am thinking of a time of syringa berry battles and the stink of crushed marigolds as we, Fred, Tazwell, my sister Pat, maybe Bob if it was school holidays, untangled our childhood. Round and round the yard we rushed until the landlocked sky shook starlings out of its blue. Before the puff adder killed Joe, before Mom stopped making confit from watermelon skins, before George Sibanda, who taught me Ndebele swear words, was put in jail. It was a time of bulldogs and chickens and vegetables from the garden, capsicums, horseradish, pumpkin, and fruit. Our pawpaws were sweeter than sugar. Even our lemons were sweet. Remember Granny Trot's mulberry jam? That was before she started fading down the distance of her colonial eyes, before we moved on full tar to the house in the village, before my dad's profile was blasted away, just before the landmines started to appear. Then Joe, then the way our St. Joseph's lilies stopped making flowers. It could have been the granite sand. It could have been the rattle of choppers. It could have been a time for lilies to sicken in the gathering shriek of cicadas. My next one's called Rhodesian Lullaby. Like shrapnel from an old bomb, we scatter to other lands, delivering reasons. On our elbows and our knees, the season's grass burns. On the backs of our hands, faces, and necks, the first traces of skin cancer. Yeah, yes, we're Rhodesians. Does it matter? Even our children have learned not to cry for their puppies' graves. The women weep no more for their gardens, and the men sleep less fitfully on their way to Smithland or Salisbury by the sea. A boozy band of rebels, we fought the world and lost. Why should it matter? Rhodesians never die. From our mouths, flat patriotism slide, tight as trouser legs, unbending as pride. Stories of war spread like phosphorus to our eyes. In a trickling of pus and blood down cheeks, we shout our lullaby. And then the third one for the 70s is the Matobo Hills. Titans once rolled boulders down these valleys, plundered granite tors and scattered alleys over Matabeleland. Dollarite walls like Shentendebudzi rocked delight in vaulting tonnage. One quartz outcrop tossed a colossus who wanted to hop from dwala to dwala. Gargantuan ladies of gorbelly girth danced in an epoch of blocks uplifted, fields buckled, steeply dipping horn-blade cleavage, knuckled by extension, thumbed by appetition, scraped by archaeology. We came in then, my bag of I-ams, your super pros, but we weren't in the mood for games. We lit a fire and bride our last Rhodesian steak. Yes, we had come in then, but not before the spearheads and hafts of Proto-Still Bay, Bambata, Magosian, of Wilton, the tiny tools, 3 divisions known, pallets with ground faces, pendants with holes, button-like beads of ostrich egg, old coals, Bushman paintings, bronze bangles, the ruins. Who has not heard of Zimbabwe, Kami, Dlodlo, Mapungubwe, then the Bantu migrants, evidence at Sabafa Hill on the old Gwanda Road, evidence ill concealed by the parks and wildlife khaki that salutes 2 campers. On slow coals, we bry our meat, sip beer, sigh as the last light slides off the Matobo Hills into night. And then we move into the 70s. Into the 80s. And the first one I want to read is called Our Last Night in Colleen-Bawn. I thought that I had finished with this theme, but I am haunted still by memories of a time that never quite got started and clearly will not have the grace to die. I think of our last night in Colleen-Bawn. We sat on boxes in the dining room, polishing off the old man's brandewyn and the 7 hoarded tins of salmon and tomato sauce. The conversation ranged from life to death, the songs from Billy Boy to Blue Suede Shoes, and then the dancing. The old girl solo hitched her bra and shrugged off 30 years. Round she goes, round and round. Then up jumps Dad and takes her in his arms, 2-stepping the stuffing out of time. Up, down, turn around, pump those elbows, bend those knees. We stand to join the riot when Jilly bursts into tears and runs outside. We all stop then, stop the talk, the singing, dancing, drinking, and the crickets take over, and a nightjar, and the distant tapping drums, and, more distant still, the drone of traffic on the Joburg Road. Then these take over. And the next one is called On Browsing Through Some British Poems. I must express not what I know, but what I do not know until the poem is written. This is no English lesson on, say, C.H. Sisson. Nothing deliberate here. Something's happening on the screen. Sorry.
No, you good. Is it
Is
your
it right?
screen? Yeah, it's all right.
It's my screen, yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Oh. Okay, sorry. Nothing deliberate here. I'm not sitting through a set work for an exam that will be marked in Cambridge, England. This is something like the heartbreak that a tree. It grew elbows with funny bones, just outside the ladies' change room. P.O. Colin Bourne. Once I peeped and saw, I think, a pair of knees, to which I now add nipples and a bounce. I know that we do not belong, wife, child, puppy, sweet peas, to this brown land, nor in Somerset where Sisson lives, but something like the heartbreak that erode, two strips of tar that smelt when afternoons grew hot and Colin born of licorice, to which I now add all sorts of sweet remembrances. I know that we are merely visitors in Africa, the blue eyes of our child, the marmalade, the pets, the BBC. And when I went to London to find some British poets shuffling verses for a game of rhyme, I was a visitor. It's something like the heartbreak at a roof, the first hot drops of Bulawayo rain that pound the corrugations of my mind, releasing songs of leaves and earth and tin, to which I add, I understand you well enough, Charles Hubert Sisson. First, that you are a man of ability, your poet's tact to express not what you know, but what you do not know until the poem is written. And then my last one for the 80s is called Winter in Matabeleland, 1987. The airlock in our hosepipe won't be heard for another season. The spider in our spout, he won't be stirred for another season. The ZANU-ZAPU dialogue is dead until what rains. The Somabula flats are tinctured red until what rains. On caps of wind, the migrant swallows soar. Will they return? Our soldiers guard the Beira corridor. Will they return? I found a rusty bayonet in the yard, lest we forget. Some 2x4 and half a playing card, lest we forget. We watch our garden dying flower by flower, perhaps the spring, the water table falling hour by hour, perhaps the spring. There's part of a heart on the card I found. Does it portend? The roadies rev their Hondas southward bound. Does it portend? Our newborn baby squints her eyes to see. Love, light the fire, your two-dimensional security. Love, light the fire. And then I think I'm getting a bit lost now. Let's just move into the 90s. I start with one called Waiting for the Bus. All along the road from Bulawayo to Gwanda or Matopus or Vic Falls, at bus stops, lay-bys, under shadeless trees, the people wait beside their bundled things. All day long they wait, and sometimes all night too, and the next day, anxiously waiting for the public transport to stop and let them in and take them home, waiting with babies to nurse, children to comfort and feed, chickens, the occasional goat. They have learned to come prepared with blankets, izinduku, pots for cooking sadza, waiting for Zupko or Shoeshine, AJ, to get them to their uncle's funeral, their cousin's wedding, their baby brother's baptism, watching the new camper vans cruising by, anxious to be at work on time, anxious not to lose their jobs, waiting. They take their time now not by wristwatches, but by the sun and the stars and the moon, by the appearance of mapani worms, by the ripening of marula fruit, by the coming of the rains, not by bus timetables, but by birth, marriage, and death. And while I wait, they count the jets that fly to Harare and Johannesburg. Liverish businessmen sucking whiskies are in these jets, and chefs with mistresses wearing the latest digital watches, digital dolly birds, all carry briefcases with combination locks and next to nothing inside, dark glasses perhaps, and a newspaper to study the stock exchange, something digital perhaps for calculating profit and more profit. It's something for people to do while they wait, counting the jets high overhead. Often the vapor trails are the only clouds in the sky. No forex for buses, they tell us, but the five-star hotels go up and another Boeing is purchased. All day they wait, all night, long suffering. And when at last the bus does stop, its tires are likely to be bald, its brakes likely to be held together with wire, its body battered, belching clouds of brain-tightening, lung-collapsing smoke. Who's responsible? Not I, says the chef, dipping his fingers in his girlfriend's cocktail, shifting his vast belly, vast enough to accommodate at least 7 baby goats. Well, don't look at me, says the managing director. My bottom line is profit. I owe it to the shareholders. Another whiskey, please. And don't think it's going to be any different tomorrow, or the next day, or the next. The time of sweet becoming is over. For those millions who depend on buses, nothing has changed. Only their expectations have once again been dashed. The time of bitter arrival is here. Not safe new buses, but the amassing of personal wealth, the cultivation of another crop of heroes. Street names change, statues change, hotels go up, jets go up, and the people go on waiting. And the next one's called Jasmine. When they cried freedom, when the sweet mingling of wood smoke and jasmine with dust, grass, granite, antelope bone, gathered into wrists which turned light the color of blood, darkness a memory of the color of blood. When their voices lifted that song and sent it echoing across Africa, I knew it. Sibanda had taught it to me, polishing the family's shoes, squatting outside the scullery door. We both wore khaki trousers, many sizes too big. No shirt, no shoes. I spat on the toe caps while he brushed. And while he brushed, we sang, Gozi Zigilele Africa, over and over, till the birds joined in, August birds. Malapagani Suntumulwayo. Comes back to me this August, now that the jasmine is blooming and the air is stilled by wood smoke, how they cried freedom and how I knew their song. A lingering chill pinches Zimbabwean sunsets into the cheeks of my children, squatting beside me as I write. It is their song too. I teach it to them over and over, till my tired eyes are pricked with tears held back, sweet smoke, dust, and jasmine. And then my third one for the 90s is called The Bow, the Boy, and the Bird. I bought my son a bow and arrow. He was pleased. He said, "Look, Dad." And he placed the bow on the ground, so gently that no dust was raised, resting the arrow across its middle, the head just clear, the flight trailing. "Dad, look, a bird." Okay, now we move to the zeros from 2000 to 2010. First one is called Coming Home to Tea. A Hugoland's robin flying low salutes us as we cycle up the driveway home. The dogs pretend to sleep, but cock their ears and thump their tails. One cat is on the roof, another stalks the shadow of a cloud. The rooster flaps his wings as if to say, "You're welcome, but remember who's in charge." And smell that blossom. Is it marigold? The crested barbet's clock alarm goes off and wakes a blowcork basking in the sun. A drongo taunts a hoopoe, steals its worm, dive bombs the sprinkler, terrifies the cat on the warm tin roof. From the kitchen comes the smell of biscuits baking. Cinnamon is in the air, and ginger, nutmeg, cloves. And listen to that kettle singing, tea. Beyond the picket, mother's thin as sticks, unreflecting eyes, aphonic babies, all but empty plastic bags. And father's ashen, no longer grim, no longer keen for work or football, only the half jack, half concealed, and children kicking at stones, chewing grass, briefly looking up as they catch the scent of spicy biscuits and tea. And the next one's called Dog. His father told him, "If you can't piss in your own garden, you aren't a man." He pissed on Matabele land. As a senior pupil at a private boarding school, he nearly drowned a junior with the contents of his bladder. At Dubai World in Cape Town, facilitating the acquisition of land in Zimbabwe with his friend the minister, he pissed in the wash basin. He pissed on the wall. He pissed on the toilet roll. He said, "There's mess in your bathroom. Get your wog to clean it." And the third one is called In the Stilly Night. Stars, no husbandry in heaven. Scorpio's sting is sharper. Who polished Orion's buckle? Tinnitus of tinkling glass. Moon, fat as a white man's dog, smelling of dip, bum like a jumping castle, casting shadows Walter Sickert might have sketched. House, this old house once rang with laughter, creaking like a swan before takeoff. Room, half empty, detaching curtains, photographs slipping from their frames. Bed, half empty, plenty of space for a cat, a dog, and a broody hen. And now the tens, 2010 to 2020. Oh, Zimbabwe. Late one morning I walked the night. Not only was the sky alight with Milky Way and fireflies and owls with disembodied eyes, but scattered widely in the dust 1,000,000 diamonds keen as lust. 1,000,000 spiders' eyes reflect my headlamp, and then I detect 10 million termites loading grass. A mass ablation comes to pass. Upheavals of the motherland close the pits with shovels of sand. Orion killed by Scorpio, his dying light, his afterglow, that tilting of the Southern Cross, Eros spilling Thanatos, bushfires dimming an errant moon, the Senate wind a loud bassoon. Late one morning, walking the night, like Dickens after Esther's plight, a stranger, undirected, hurled against an unforgiving world, yet mindful of our mother's womb, which doubles as a common tomb. Mindful too of shoveling sand in rhythms of a saraband, grand triple time, long second beat, laying to rest just so much meat. Here it's sugaring coffins of plank, these holes down which our nation sank. And the next one's called Broke Buttock Blues. They beat me with branches wrapped up in barbed wire. They beat me with branches wrapped up in barbed wire. My baby, she crying, her face is on fire. They say you are sellout, you vote Svangerai. They say you are sellout, you vote Svangerai. My baby, she dying, please God, tell me why. They beat first my head, then my neck, then my bums. They beat first my head, then my back, then my bums. They laugh and they say it's like playing the drums. I beg them for water. They say, go ask Blair. I beg them for water. They say, go ask Blair. Please put out the fire in Mucheche's hair. My bottom is broken, cannot sit or stand. My bottom is broken, cannot sit or stand. Mucheche can't breathe with her mouth in the sand. They burned all our mealies, our chickens, our dog. They burned all our mealies, our chickens, our dog. My uncle, they hit him to death with a log. For hours they beat me. For hours I cry. For hours they beat me. For hours I cry. Please God save my baby. Do not let her die. When they leave, like a tortoise, I crawl very slow. When they leave, like a tortoise, I crawl very slow. But my baby stopped crying a long time ago. Mwana wangu stopped crying a long time ago. And then my third one in the tens is called Only Jacarandas. Willows require still pools. Girls, silver-backed mirrors. Priests, the cross of Jesus. Only jacarandas can take their reflection from the dull sky of tarmac. And then we move to the decade of my 70s. First one's called An Unexpected Visitor. A little sparrowhawk descends. The laughing doves duck out of sight. My cat, the tortoiseshell, pretends to stalk a gecko in the fading light. His purpose is to soak, not drink or bath. His razor beak's benign, begins to nod and then to sink into his breast, barred of feathers fine. His piercing yellow eyes recede to a lemon-tinted grey. For him, no reason and no need, soaking up my garden this dying day. And the next one's called Mother Nature's Warning. I heard a plaintive cry on high. It drained me to the marrow. I looked, saw hornbills floating by, raked me like a harrow. Like swaying kites, they tease the wind, no strings to draw them down. Their message is that those who've sinned in countryside or town, those dressed in camouflage or blue, or three-piece suits bespoke, or curly wigs who need not queue, are going up in smoke. These bushfire birds have come to town. Their message is quite clear. He that wears the hollow crown will waste in his despair. Okay, and then my third one there is called The Clothes Dictators Wear. Cloth creases, even worsted with old age. Tones, even tyrants, turn cataract blue. The folded hanky, stained with rheum. The shame of watermarks upon the fly. The rage of effeminate fists inclined to slew, limp-wristed around gatherings of lame duck eggheads that feed Zimbabwe to gold diggers, carpetbaggers, corporations with logos, that excite children, excite mistresses with gross appetites for old holders of fierce contending nations, feral dogs dragging promise into night, dragging suits more wrinkled, more vaguely hung, no longer moving like a second skin, though once bespoke. But now the lily folds, the prostate nudges the bladder, the lung is bunged, the lip minced, and the Botox grin like pressed cloth, dry cleaning, coat hangers, holds an Italian design, choosy, slick, a three-piece suit on a tottering stick. And then to round off, I thought I'd read 3 poems that I've written very recently, if I can find them. The first one's called Mood Changer. It was inspired by a dragonfly. I took my kneecaps for a walk, all on a summer's day, to watch those busy killers stalk their unsuspecting prey. I listened to my kneecaps creak like crickets in the grass. I had to stop and take a leak, and then it came to pass. To my delight, a flash of light and iridescent blue took out a mozzie in full flight from Rome to Timbuktu. From Rome to Timbuktu it streamed, zip-zapping all the way. When I was but a boy, I dreamed of this symbolic day. I dreamed when light with water merged, the hover and the glide, that something deep inside me surged with joy unqualified. Don't wallow in decrepitude, the hurt, the shame that stings. The dragonfly will change your mood to nano-composite wings. And then just 2 more then to round it off. This one's called When Men Make War. Lost babies on the Serpentine, digital inexcitability, fumbling for the tap in a box of wine. Water babies drifting out to sea. That bird, a crow, it pecks my bleaching skull, pecks away at hubcaps, windowsills. I can't respond. I'm in a coma, dull. The tap comes crooked and the claret spills. Babies bubbling in the rising flood, paralysis of fingertips, a hint of iron in the crimson blood. Like leaves they float, like corks, like bottled ships. When men make war, our babies drift away. War, down the river, gone, across the bay. And then finally, and this one appeared on the advert for the reading. It's called A Crumbled Edifice. Something less like light than darkness dawning, less like mist than rubble-rousing smoke, less like bird duets than mother's mourning, less like chance than someone's cruel joke, more like gloom than aspiration rising, boys and girls committing suicide. Not unexpected, no, not surprising. Yesterday another teacher died. Avoidable the shame of poverty, of flight from psychopathic power. Avoidable the neighbor's hanging tree, insecticide, the fatal flower. Our chefs carousing in their bubble, Ubuntu's been reduced to rubble. It's enough.
Thank you so much, John. Can we please unmute ourselves and give John a big round of applause?
Thank you, everybody.
It's the only way we can make this feel more human. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. I only have compliments. I only have one question which I can hold off. Are there any people in the room with questions for John? Are there any questions for John? Jacques, your hand went up immediately. The floor is yours.
I think my hand was quicker than my brain. But okay. John, I was incredibly moved by your reading, and I will never forget it.
Lower hand, press F6 to return to
What's
the
happening
meeting
here?
controls button.
I was incredibly moved by it, and I'll never forget it. What strikes me is how often when you are dealing with very difficult emotions, when there's a kind of rage or complaint, the poem still sings, and it's something very, very deep and physical that happens to me when I encounter that, because there's a tension, isn't there, between that deep emotion and that steady beat but it
press
sings.
F6 to return to the meeting.
I don't know if you want to say something about it, about what it is that poetry, the relationship between poetry and that deep emotion, especially when it's difficult emotion, when it's rage or grief. I don't know. I don't know if I've given you enough room to say something.
Jacques, you said that my poetry sings, and I thank you for that. It's a compliment, because for me, what separates poetry from prose is just that. That poetry sort of moves towards a state of music, and that is mostly captured in rhythm and rhyme. But of course, in other phonological effects like alliteration and assonance and onomatopoeia and contrasting short vowels and long vowels. So I just I just like to and I know that there's this reaction to poems that sing, which tend to sort of which is that it makes the poetry less serious. And I just think that's for you to decide. You know, and maybe you're right. There is a sort of a kind of a tension between the two, but it shouldn't be a weak. It shouldn't be a negative tension. It should be something.
No, I think people react against rhyming poetry because most people who try to do it quite badly.
Yes, it's actually it requires a lot of skill to use rhyme that isn't contrived, so that the rhyme actually contributes to the meaning of the poem. You know, so that form and content come as close together as possible. Of course, my sort of mentor there is none other than William Shakespeare, who more than any other poet in my experience could merge form and content. And you know, you don't do it consciously. I don't sit down and say, oh, I'm going to do this consciously to make this work. It's just part of a gift, I think, or maybe part of 60 years of writing and honing. Because, you know, I don't think so much of writing poems. I think of making poems. I think of it as a craft, and then the craft becomes an art. You know, if it somehow works. So yeah, it's and you know, I mean, I'm going against the grain with my conventional forms. Very few people these days bother to write sonnets and villanelles and sestinas and ballads, but I do, and partly because in a very formative time of my writing, when I was at primary school, our teachers read to us the poems of the Georgian period, you know, like John Masefield and Walter Delamere, and so on. And they were great. They were great rhymesters, those guys. But of course, my content, I think, is very different from theirs. It's very political. It's not always political, but it's also tries to sort of create a sense of the sublime by making some kind of contact with nature that's kind of almost ineffable. So yeah, I just old-fashioned, I guess. I guess living in Zimbabwe helps because we're about 50 years behind in all sorts of ways.
Jacques, have you gotten your response? Has this been satisfactory?
Oh, sorry, I find
Jacques?
it very hard.
Sorry?
Have you received the response? Are you good?
Yes, no.
All right,
Thank
awesome. Thank you, John, for that very in-depth response. It kind of
Can I just
also answered
add-
some of my questions.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing before,
Sure.
which picks up what you said, Jacques, is that it's this paradox that I find somehow if you stricture yourself and you give yourself a rigid sort of framework, we've got this number of syllables and this kind of rhyme scheme, it kind of paradoxically gives you a kind of freedom. It kind of somehow brings out images and ideas that you would not normally have. It's this idea that stone walls do not a prison make. I find that the most difficult poetry for me to write is free verse, because it's free, because it's very hard to kind of structure it and to sort of contain it and give it some kind of a potency, like a bomb, that like an atom bomb.
Water.
The smaller it gets, the more potent it becomes, kind of thing. There's a bit of that in it as well.
There's the positive tension again.
Yeah, positive tension. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
All right, thank you, John. Douglas, you have a question. The floor is yours.
Not a question. I just thought I'd show everyone the cover of a book, which was John's first book collection of poems.
Oh, yeah.
Lovely.
And it was
Yes,
Douglas,
lovely.
who
Lovely.
published it for me.
All right, Douglas, thank you for the book. It's always lovely to see book covers. I find book covers very interesting.
That was in 1989, and it actually had quite a few of the poems from the 70s and the 80s. In fact, all of them.
Water.
I think I have a memory of hearing your voice the first time in 1989 or 1990, Douglas, and you were at a poetry workshop at UCT, and you actually read one or two of those poems. I can remember your voice reading the one about Granny Tut's jam. I'm
Yeah.
maybe
Sorry.
making it up, but I don't think so.
I remember that particular thing at the summer school.
Yeah.
And I don't recollect that you were there at the time, but
I look a bit different.
I have always been a great admirer of Granny Trot's mulberry jam,
Yeah.
because it so precisely sticks to the concrete image and never veers, never asserts an opinion, simply lets the reader encounter that physical and sensual world of the writer, unharried by the poet's opinions. And that's, so I think I've always admired, I think it's one of the, if I had to do an anthology of South African poems, it's certainly a poem I would include.
And that's something, again, I learned from Shakespeare, the point that Douglas made there, which today is kind of, the term is show, don't tell. This is the first thing you get taught in writers' workshops.
Yeah.
And I learned that from reading Shakespeare, and Keats called it negative capability. And he applied it more to Shakespeare than any other writer, the ability to show rather than tell, let the reader decide. And I think it still stands as very good advice.
Yeah. Robert, the floor is yours. You have a comment or question? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd like just to sort of make a comment. Well, to say something. John, I run a number of poetry groups and have written poetry and write poetry, and but I'd never heard of you, and likewise, I'm sure you've never heard of me. But I was introduced to you and your name by a fellow hockey player, because I play hockey and I've played hockey for years. And he told me about this amazing school teacher that he had, and that just moved his classes in so many ways, in English literature and poetry. And when I saw you, and then I read, and then I did some of your poetry. We did some of your poetry at our poetry group the other day. So you might like to know that someone was looking at your poetry. But this character, his name is Tony Huggett, and I sent him the invitation for tonight, and he's here. And Tony has his hand up, and he's going to say something, I see. But I thought I'd just say that. And of course, I enjoyed those wonderful images and the sensuousness of the poems and its context, its relationship with nature and taste and smell and all those things. And it's beautiful music. I just want to say that along with everyone else. And perhaps Tony would want to show himself and say something.
Thank you. Well, Tony introduced me to Pink Floyd and Queen, among others.
Yeah.
I learned from him as well.
Well, John, it's awfully good to see you, and really great. One of those things just to share with the general audience. John had the amazing capability of making Richard III seem exciting, which I think anybody who's read Richard III is probably going to be astounded by that. But he also, the go-between, L.P. Hartley's go-between, he made that so incredibly exciting in terms of the words and the language that he put in, because he brought it down to the very basics, ignored the story in general, but pointed out the glamour of just the constructed sentences and things like that, which kind of brought for me, and I'm a scientist, I'm one of those dull, boring people, and it brought to me the beauty of the English language. It was really special. But he also has the great accolade. I write some music, and I've done some things with a couple of good friends, and I sent John some lyrics of some of our songs recently, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said that, which is beautiful, because they are, words to music are just words to music. There's no structure, there's no value. They kind of just hook in there. But John was good enough to look at them and criticize them honestly for me, with an expected result. But all of those things, and I've followed. I've got pretty nearly all of his books, poetry and the novels, which are spectacular, and he's kind of right the way back from my A-level years, been my source of inspiration for language. It's been fantastic. So thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Tony, for those very kind words. And thank you for introducing me to what was it? What was your car again? It was an Anglia, wasn't it?
No, it was an Austin A50. Yeah.
The car you had
Austin A50. And with
Okay.
the one and we played. If I remember correctly, it was Night at the Opera when it had just been released by Queen.
Yes, yes.
And played it full ball in the car park.
Oh, that's right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely to hear your
Fantastic fun. Yeah. Great memories.
It's always great to hear these tidbits that we didn't know, to be part of reuniting friends and introducing new people to old people. It's always great. Robert, if you could please, in the chat, there's a question about where your poetry groups are. So if you could type that out in the chat, or if you could shoot us an email, we'll be able to share those.
I'll send you an email. Shall I send you an email and then you can pass it on?
Yeah, sure. That would be great. Thank you. And John, I did say I only had compliments, and there are only compliments in the chat. Julie said, such a soul-filled reading. Thanks so much. Don and Ian say, brilliant, inspiring. Thank you. John, more please. And you have Swift, who said, great reading. Thanks, John. See you next time. Pelelani, moving. Thank you. And from me, I find your just the technical ability with poetry. I am jealous as a writer myself. I am jealous that it comes naturally to you to write in constraints, because I wouldn't be able to. And the poem from the 90s, Bus Stop, it reminded me, it was almost like a condensed version of the first chapter of Titi Dangarimba's Monoble Body, where she writes about a scene at the taxi, where she gets on a taxi, where Tambo gets on a taxi. And it reminded me of that scene, like a condensed version of that scene, so alive and rich. Oh, yeah, I could say more. And there was also a poem you read in the 70s. And the sort of alliteration that you used it reminded me of Nguni languages. And I found that super interesting. I need time with your poetry that is outside of this.
Thank you very much. Of course, rhyme has come back in a big way with rap music.
Yes, yes.
I guess, in a sense. Are there any other questions or comments for John before we take our break? Oh, Julie, the floor is yours.
Just one comment. I really enjoyed the repetition of whole lines and phrases, and especially that poem ending with the baby.
Yes,
there's double lines, and it's as if with the second reading of the line, it actually you had time to think, where's the story going? It just was very effective. Besides the rhyme and the alliteration, I really appreciated the double lines.
That's a blues structure. If you listen to blues music, that's how it's structured. Exactly like
really
that. I copied blues. Thank you very much.
Are you a musician then?
Sorry?
As well. Are you also a musician?
No, not at all. No.
Okay.
My kids used to tell me to shut up when I sang.
You have a lovely deep voice.
One of my friends said that I sounded like Liberace on steroids.
Your reading voice is lovely.
Oh, thank you. Not a very good accent though, but anyway.
No, it's a good deep voice.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments, questions? No? Okay, let's give John one last round of applause and we can take a break. One last.
Thank you very much.
All right, it's exactly 8:30. So we'll come back at 20:35. So 25 minutes to 9. So I'm gonna play some piano music and we can come back in 5 minutes. How do I stop recording?